If you've got the line numbers, we will start on line 267. This whole section of the poem is about the sadhana of King Ashwapati, who will become the human father of Savitri. And Sri Aurobindo is telling us about the spiritual development of that great soul, King Ashwapati. And particularly in this canto, we are reading about how, as the result of the secret knowledge which has come to him through the action of the goddesses of intuition and inspiration and revelation, he's gained a deep secret knowledge, and in the light of that knowledge he has realized that there must be a possibility of bringing about a divine life upon earth. The earth life need not always remain as unsatisfactory as it is now. And he dedicates himself to working for that great change. And there's a description of how he's so intense in his aspiration. It's like his being takes off like a rocket. It leaves behind all earthly thoughts and aspirations. He mounted burning like a cone of fire. And as Sri Aurobindo and the mother tell us very often in their writings, in their talks, if there's a very intense and sincere aspiration like that, there will always be a response from above. So what we are reading about now is the response that comes, this transforming response. Something comes from above and seizes hold of Ashwapati and changes his nature being. It's more than just a change of consciousness. It's a change of the whole nature. And now I will read about a page which speaks about the results of that transforming change. Line 267. As when a timeless eye annuls the hours, abolishing the agent and the act, so now his spirit shone out, wide, blank, pure. His wakened mind became an empty slate on which the universal and soul could write. All that represses our fallen consciousness was taken from him like a forgotten load. A fire that seemed the body of a god consumed the limiting figures of the past and made large room for a new self to live. Eternity's contact broke the molds of sense. A greater force than the earthly held his limbs. Huge workings bared his undiscovered sheaths. Strange energies wrought, and screened tremendous hands unwound the triple cord of mind and freed the heavenly whiteness of a Godhead's gaze. As through a dress the wearer's shape is seen, there reached through forms to the hidden absolute, a cosmic feeling and transcendent sight. Increased and heightened were the instruments. Illusion lost her aggrandizing lens. As from her failing hand the measures fell, atomic looked the things that loomed so large. The little ego's ring could join no more. In the enormous spaces of the self, the body now seemed only a wandering shell. His mind, the many frescoed outer court of an imperishable inhabitant. His spirit breathed a superhuman air. The imprisoned deity rent its magic fence, as with a sound of thunder and of seas, vast barriers crashed around the huge escape. Immutably coeval with the world, circle and end of every hope and toil, inexorably drawn round thought and act, the fixed, immovable peripheries effaced themselves beneath the incarnate's tread. The dire velamen and the bottomless crypt between which life and thought forever move, forbidden still to cross the dim dread bounds. The guardian darknesses, mute and formidable, empowered to circumscribe the wingless spirit in the boundaries of mind and ignorance, protecting no more a dual eternity, vanished, rescinding their enormous role. Once figure of creation's vain ellipse, the expanding zero lost its giant curve. The old adamantine vetoes stood no more. Overpowered were earth and nature's obsolete rule. The python coils of the restricting law could not restrain the swift arisen God. Abolished were the scripts of destiny. There was no small, death-hunted creature more. No fragile form of being to preserve from an all-swallowing immensity. The great hammer beats of a pent-up world heart burst open the narrow dams that keep us safe against the forces of the universe. The soul and cosmos faced as equal powers. A boundless being in a measureless time invaded nature with the infinite. He saw unpathed, unwalled his Titan scope. So, lots of difficult words, lots of mysterious images. So let's see how much we can understand. So line 267. Martin, would you begin?
Es wenn timeless I announce the hours, abolishing the agent and the act, so now is spirit shown out, wide, blank, pure.
Yes.
His vacant mind became an empty slate, on which the universal and soul could rise.
Thank you. So this is what is happening to King Aswapati as a result of this transforming descent which has come and taken over his whole nature. So Sri Aurobindo refers to an experience. He says the experience when you feel as if a timeless I, an I with a capital E, a big I, annuls the hours. It abolishes time. There are no more hours and moments. It's as if we become aware of a huge I, a presence above which is watching everything. And that I is timeless. It's not bounded or limited by anything in time. So when its look annuls the hours, there just isn't any more time anymore. No? So that at the same time, that look, that timelessness abolishes, wipes out the agent and the act. There's no feeling of anybody doing anything. And there's nothing that is being done. So just this timeless state and no limitations of any kind. Usually we are so limited by time and space and the consequences of action. All that is just wiped out by that experience of the timeless I. So Sri Aurobindo says, in the same way now, Aswapati's spirit just shines out, wide, blank, pure. It's just pure, timeless spirit without action. And as a result of that experience, his awakened mind, he's not in trance, he's not in sleep, he's not having a vision. This is his awakened, conscious mind becomes like an empty slate. I don't know whether any of you used to practice with a slate in school, no? It used to be that small children, when they were first beginning to learn letters and numbers, they were given a thin slice of stone set in a wooden frame and a piece of chalk. No? And then they could practice writing the forms, the numbers, and then they were very easy to wipe out. With a little sponge you could wipe it out, practice again. So his mind becomes like an empty slate. Nothing is written there. No? But the eternal, the universal being, the sole reality, the only reality, could write on that empty slate of Aswapati's mind. Some message could appear there.
Mantras of Mother.
Yes.
On the November 20th, Mother has written, let me be like a blank paper so that the divine can write it.
Yes.
Similar.
Yes. Yeah. That would be a very special state, no? Just to be completely blank, so that the divine can just write or do or whatever he wants with you. It's a state of total, pure surrender. I'm sorry, dear, I don't know your name.
Lenny.
Lele? Lenny. Would you read, please?
All that represses our fallen consciousness was taken from him like a forgotten load. A fire that sealed the body of a god consumed the limiting figures of the past and made large room for a new self to live.
To live.
To live.
Yes. So what he experiences is that all his humanity, everything that represses us, that presses us down and prevents us from reaching a diviner state, there's so much in nature that represses, that keeps pressing down our consciousness, which is not a divine consciousness, but an ignorant consciousness, a fallen consciousness. But all those limitations and weights were just lifted off King Aswapati, like a forgotten load. It's as if he hadn't even noticed that he was carrying a load, and then it's taken off, and suddenly, how free. No? And then there's a purifying fire that takes the form of a god, of the god Agni, the fire of aspiration and purification. That fire just eats up all the limiting figures and forms and habits of the past. And so it leaves large room, plenty of space for a new self to live. It's been pointed out to me recently how much we live by habit. Over the years, since our childhood, so many habits have been imprinted on us that make our lives possible, relatively easy. And to change that is really very, very difficult. But if this purifying fire of aspiration comes in, all those limiting figures of the past can be consumed, just burned up, and that leaves so much wide room for our spirit, our soul, to build up a new self that expresses it better.
But Shraddhavan, I have not question, but I want to tell you something. When suddenly you change not you, but
when something changes you.
Yeah, your habit and everything, you will not understand what is really the work inside you. Is absolutely incredible. And also another form coming. and in the body is incredibly true. For example, morning I do pranayama. When I extend my hand like that, I look inside, but in the maybe subtle physical, I come in very, very, very fast. But it's not easier.
Yeah, I think these are some of the exercises which Mother speaks about, that if we seriously want to progress, we have to get rid of all these psychological habits that have been imprinted on us. And she says it's really not easy. And when she gives examples of some of these habits, then you think, well, how could I ever change that? She says, we are convinced that if we go out in the rain, we will get wet. Or if we put our hand into the fire, we will be burned. But it's not necessarily true. If those habitual reactions to the touches of things can be changed, it doesn't need to be like that.
But it's also, I give you example. When I listen Mother CD, entretien especially, I discuss with her. I tell Mother, please, I want to not repeat, and answer, coming silence, but in the act. In the suddenly, it disappears. It's very, very, very. But I discuss with her also initially. I'm not stay passive and before I am like that. But now I discuss. Mother is there. Today is 29 March.
Well, today is the anniversary of the first meeting in the physical of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Yes. So Asvapati is having some experience like that, of everything being wiped away, so there are no old formations, no? Everything is left open for something new to come in, a new self to live. Bhuvana.
Eternity's contact broke the modes of sense. A greater force than the earthly held his limb. Huge workings bared his undiscovered sheaths. Strange energies rocked and screamed, tremendous hands, unwound the triple cord of mind and freed the heavenly wideness of a God's gaze.
Yes. So this timeless eye that has looked at him, he feels a touch of eternity, contact with eternity, with the what has no time and no limit. No? And that contact broke the molds of sense. Our way of knowing about the shape of our own body and our contact with the world around us. It comes about through our senses. We have several different senses. A sense of touch, of sight, of hearing, taste, smell. So these are like molds into which consciousness bores so that we can get a picture of our own shape and the world outside our own body. But with this contact with eternity, all those molds are broken. So all those normal reactions to the touch of things, it no longer applies. He feels that his whole body, his limbs, are being held up by a much greater force than our normal earthly life force. Huge workings bared his undiscovered sheaths. The Indian traditional psychology tells us that we have many different layers of bodies. They're called sheaths. A sheath is a cover. You may keep a sharp knife in a sheath, or a sword can be kept in a sheath. So it's like the different layers of our consciousness are like coverings, sheaths. And mostly we're only aware of the physical one, the outermost one. Then we may become aware of our subtler sheaths, perhaps especially the life sheath, the mind sheath. And then there are deeper and vaster sheaths, our bliss sheath, our covering of bliss, which is like the body of the soul. So it's as if there are powers that are helping him by opening up these undiscovered sheaths, baring them. That means revealing them, laying them bare so that they can be seen. And there are strange energies working as like hands, as if huge, powerful hands are working on him. But those hands are screened. He can't see them. But he feels that what they are doing is they are unwinding the triple cord of mind. This is a traditional image from the Vedas that our spirit and particularly our consciousness is tied with cords that keep us tied to our human form and our human way of being. And one of the cords is the physical, and one is the life force, and one is the mental one. They're kind of wound together to make a cord, But in order for the soul really to become free, that cord has to be unwound.
Repeat, it's matter, life force, and
Mind.
mind.
So then when it's unwound, then he can see things in a completely different way. It's set free. The heavenly wideness of a Godhead's gaze, the way that the soul sees, the way that the divine being sees, which is not limited by this triple cord. Excuse me. Wrought. Yeah, this is a very peculiar word. It's it's from the old form of English, and it's connected with working. The most familiar usage, we talk about wrought iron. So what is wrought iron? It's iron that is hammered into shapes. So we have railings or gates that are made out of wrought iron. It means the iron hasn't been poured into a mold, it has been worked into particular shapes. It's a very strange verb. We have it just in this form, and in a past or in another form, to wreak. It means to make or to work. So we can say that certain forces or a tsunami comes along and wreaks havoc, causes destruction everywhere. So these are just the only forms of this old world that we have left. Wrought, wreak, and wreaked.
Here that reference, strange energies wrought means?
Sorry?
Here, what is
These strange energies are working on him.
Okay.
Maybe like a smith with his hammer. No?
And the Tripulka, anything to the Brahmins wearing the holy thread, no? Puri moon.
Yes, but this is something else. This is a cord that's woven of 3 strands.
Yeah. There also in Brahmins they have 3 strands.
They have 3 strands?
3, after marriage they will wear 6.
But I think that must have a different significance. I don't know. We'll have to ask some expert. Bhuvana, did you read?
Yes, I.
Leila?
As through a dress, the wearer's shape is seen. There
Reached, they're reached.
through forms to the hidden absolute, the cosmic feeling, and transcendent sight.
Yes. Usually our clothes are not transparent, but still one can see roughly the shape of the person, no? Through the form. We can see through the dress, we can see something, an indication of the shape of the person. So what Sri Aurobindo is telling us is that as a result of this transformation, Asvapati gains the power of subtle sight so that he can look through forms, all these outer forms, and see that divine absolute which is inhabiting them. He doesn't see it clearly like that, but just the way that you see a person's shape through the dress they're wearing. You can see that it's there.
Here he got the cosmic feeling.
Yes.
For him to
This universal feeling. These are like new senses. Now we have our senses of sight and feeling, so this is a kind of universal feeling and transcendent sight.
So before it is given, it is contact with the modes of sense. That means the physical senses are broken down,
Yes.
and he is receiving the new senses.
He gets new senses, yes. Or the existing senses are given much greater scope. The limits are changed. So who will read next? Ganga Lakshmi.
Increase and heighten resonance streams. Illusion lost their grand pleasing learnings, as former feeling and the measures fell. Atomic look within that loom so long.
Yes. So it means all his instruments of perception and knowledge become much more powerful, heightened, and more sensitive. Increased and heightened. Heightened means sensitive. No? All the instruments of knowledge. And the power of illusion. So what illusion does, or one of the things that illusion does, is she gives us a kind of magnifying glass that makes small things look big. Aggrandizing, it means making bigger. She can't do that anymore because now he can see clearly and accurately how things are. She can't fool him with her magnifying glass there. And illusion, of course, one of the names for this power is Maya. Maya is the one who measures things, who gives things their limits and their forms. No? But with this new perception that has come to King 𝐒𝐕𝐈𝐑𝐈, it's as if all those tools that she uses for measuring, they just fall from her hands. No? And that means that things that had looked very big and powerful and important suddenly are tiny, atomic, almost invisible.
What's illumined? What illumined? Is it word for illumined?
To loom. Ah, yes, this is a nice English word. In the evening, perhaps a big black cloud may loom up over the sun, obscuring it. And we use it also of threats. If we feel that something is endangering us or troubling us, it's like a big shadow looming up over us. I don't know the origin of this verb. But
always connected to something negative?
Yes, something frightening, something shadowy and dark. So those tiny little things, they looked so big and important. But when he can see them properly, they are not threatening at all, not troubling at all. I'm sorry, dear, I've forgotten your name. I've forgotten your name. You told me, but I've forgotten. So,
pronunciation, the little ego's ring could join no more.
yes.
In the
Enormous
space of the self. The body now seemed only a wandering self. His mind the many frescoed outer court of an imperishable inhabitant. His spirit breathed a superhuman air.
Thank you. So, this little ring that limits our consciousness, our sense of individuality, so it's like a little ring, and there we are confined, stuck inside it. But that has been opened up. It can't contain King 𝐒𝐕𝐈𝐑𝐈 anymore. The little ego's ring could join no more. It's as if it's been broken, like a ring that's been broken, can't close anymore. So he experiences these enormous spaces of the self, vast, immense spaces. And in those spaces of his consciousness, of his self, of his being, the body now appears like just a kind of crust, an outside crust, a shell. And that shell, of course, it moves around, the body moves around, but it doesn't have anything inside it, it's just empty substance. That's the feeling of the body, that he's much vaster than this wandering shell, which is the body. And his mind, very beautiful image here, his mind has become like the many frescoed outer court of an imperishable inhabitant. A fresco, it's a painting on a wall. So maybe the mind appears like that, like the wall of a courtyard that's been beautifully painted on the inside. Many frescoes. There's all kinds of pictures. But that's just the entrance way, the courtyard. And all this belongs to an imperishable inhabitant. The frescoes can fade and fall off the walls, and the courtyard can get ruined. But the one who is dwelling within it and enjoying it, he's imperishable. He will always be there.
And inhabitant can be called a soul? Soul.
This will be the soul. The soul or the spirit, or both. So the many frescoed outer court of an imperishable inhabitant. And then his spirit breathed a superhuman air. Again, it's this sense of freedom. There's nothing limiting or confining. No.
Outer court, last week we read about the vestibule. Is it similar?
Yes, it's something similar to that. We would say a courtyard. No? There's the gateway, and then there's an open courtyard with the buildings around it, and you can go here and there. So perhaps that's decorated. It's like the entrance way. The mind can be like that. And there many ideas come and move around, and even buying and selling goes on. All that goes on in this outer court of the being. So who will read next? You read, Joel? No, please.
The imprisoned deity rent its magic fence, as with the sound of thunder and of seas, vast barriers crash around the huge escape.
Yes. So his spirit can breathe superhuman air, and it becomes very, very powerful. So the imprisoned deity, the divine part that's imprisoned in the body, it rents, it tears apart that fence, a magic fence, because only some kind of enchantment can keep the deity confined like that. But the magic fence gets torn apart. And when that happens, then there's a big noise, a sound of thunder and of seas, vast barriers. These are really cosmic barriers that are just crashing down around this huge escape of the spirit within from all its illusory limitations. And now Sri Aurobindo is going to speak a bit more about those barriers. There's a description of them. Would you read, please? Yes. Immutably means they can't change. Those barriers have been there and will be there as long as the world is there. Co-evil, it means covering the same lifespan, time span. Co-evil.
Is it like contemporary, similar to it?
There's something of that idea, yes. your contemporaries who are alive at the same time as you are. But here the idea is that it's a fixed relationship, that as long as the world exists, these barriers exist. And these barriers are the circle, the circumference, and the limit of every hope and toil, of all our human aspirations and efforts. They are inexorably drawn round thought and act. Inexorably, it means mercilessly, ruthlessly drawn, and if something is inexorable, it can't be softened or lessened in any way. So these are very, very powerful limits, barriers around our human thoughts and acts. These are the limitations. These are peripheries. Peripheries are the borders around something, or the line around something. These are fixed, immovable. But now they effaced themselves. They just vanished. If you efface yourself, you just disappear, not there anymore. Effaced themselves beneath the incarnate's tread. This means the incarnate divine. It is the soul that has escaped from these barriers, and now it can even tread on them, and when it treads on them, they vanish. They don't exist anymore, these limits. And now he's going to describe still a bit more about these limitations. Tomoko, you.
The dire valley and the bottomless crypt, between which life and thought forever move, forbidden still to cross the dim, dread bounds. The garden darknesses, mute and formidable, empowered to circumscribe the wingless spirit in the boundaries of mind and ignorance, protecting no more a dual eternity, vanished, rescinding their enormous role. Once figure of creation's vain ellipse, the expanding zero lost its giant curve.
Yes, so let's look at this. These are the boundaries. There's a velamen, a veil. And he says it's a dire velamen. It's something quite terrifying. It's impossible. You're not supposed to cross that barrier. It is literally, it's like a curtain or a barrier in a sacred building which separates the ordinary people from the sacred space. And just ordinary people are not supposed to cross over and enter that sacred space. And there's a curtain, a velamen. That's the upper limit. And below, there's this bottomless crypt. A crypt is a room, a space in the foundations of a building. And in a sacred building, it's usually where the relics are kept. The relics which are the foundation of that, the sacredness of that space. But this is a bottomless crypt. We can't reach the bottom of that space. So that our life and thought are always moving between this veil above and this crypt below. The veil of the superconscient, we could think, and the crypt of the inconscient. So our life and thought forever move between those two immovable peripheries. Life and thought are still forbidden, always forbidden, to cross those dim, dread bounds. There's something dreadful or inspiring about those boundaries. Life and thought can't cross them. These are the guardian darknesses, a kind of darkness above and below. They are mute, they don't speak to us, they don't tell us anything, and they are formidable. They are very, very powerful. They are empowered. They've been given the right, the role to circumscribe the wingless spirit. To circumscribe means to draw a limit around something. So once it's limited like that, the spirit no longer has its wings. It can't fly. They have to, these guardian darknesses circumscribe the wingless spirit in the boundaries of mind and ignorance. They've been there, their role is to protect a dual eternity. But now with this escape of the inner divinity, they vanish. They give up their enormous role, this role of guardians. So when they do that, this circumscribing circle, it was once the image, the indication of the limit of the whole creation. It's an ellipse. That means not exactly a circle, lengthened out. The orbits of the planets and the stars are elliptical. It was an expanding zero, like our universe, expanding, getting bigger and bigger, a zero, an emptiness. Now it loses its giant curve. There's no more limit. There's no more emptiness.
What is the dual eternity?
Sorry?
What is the dual eternity?
Yes, what does he mean by an dual eternity? It's the kind of thing we should ask Dr. Alok. There are very few people left to whom one can ask questions like these. We can ask Shraddhavan. Will you do it?
Yes.
What is meant here by this dual eternity?
If I don't forget, yes. If I don't forget, I can.
Yes, thank you.
What does it mean, Shraddhavan, eternity?
That's just what Joel was asking me, and I was saying that I am not sure what it means, and I mentioned that there are very few people left whom one could ask. We could have asked Norini, or we could have asked Amal Kiran, Or we could have asked Arindam Basu. He was the last one who was left, but I felt I can ask. But now, so I requested Joel to ask Shraddhavan. Yes.
It may be that the Vailaman and bottomless, the two dual eternity, the sky and the bottomless, that can be the dual eternity.
One can think of a kind of an eternal duality of two-ness. Yes.
Top and
yes. But I'm not sure enough to. And why does it need protecting?
Because this is superconscious and inconscient.
Yeah.
These two things.
Yes, probably it's the duality, it's the opposition that needs protecting. And now they don't have to protect that oppositeness anymore. So things can become one and harmonized again. Who's next? Sebastian?
The old adamantine vetoes stood no more, overpowered were earth and nature's obsolete rule. The python coils of the restricting law could not restrain the swift risen God. Abolished were the scripts of destiny.
Thank you. So the old adamantine vetoes. Adamantine, it's connected with diamond. It's the hardest, densest substance. And if somebody's adamant, you will never get him to change his mind. It's something very resistant and hard. So the adamantine vetoes, what is a veto actually? It's when you say no, it cannot happen. No? So those commands, those denials, now they can't prevail any longer. And the rule of earth and of nature is obsolete. It no longer applies. The spirit has become free of that. The python is a kind of symbol of that grip of matter. So the python coils of the restricting law. Python, is a serpent that destroys you by squashing you, restricting you. So as long as we are ruled by the law of matter, we are under the control of that python. But for Asvapati, it no longer has any power. It can't restrain him, because he's just escaped. The swift arisen God has escaped from all these limitations of the material manifestation. So all those scriptures and rules and regulations about destiny, about the laws of consequence and effect, and cause and effect and consequence and karma, gone. They don't apply anymore. Alice.
There was no small death unto creature born, no fragile form of being to preserve from an all-swallowing immensity.
This is the ego's little ring. No? We need this protection for a time. As long as we are small creatures, hunted by death, we need this protection to preserve the fragile form of our individuality from an all-swallowing immensity. We would just get dissolved in the universe if there weren't this little ego's ring to keep our identity together. And you might remember Sri Aurobindo has said, The ego was the helper, but then it becomes the balm. It helps us to form, as Sri Aurobindo says, our hard-won individuality. It is such an important thing. You can think that at the very beginning of the universe there was just this soup of primal plasm, whatever it was. Nothing differentiated. Nothing had any character or individuality. And how long evolution has taken to give human beings their hard-won individuality. And when we've got that hard-won individuality, then we are supposed to develop it as fully as possible, so that eventually the swift arisen God can just escape from it. May still choose to make use of these. Sorry? Like a butterfly. Yes, something like that. But the amazing thing is that the swift arisen God still keeps contact with that little individuality and uses it. And it's very beautifully described in the Life Divine how important this individuality is for the whole evolutionary process. But that's what we are at the moment, fragile forms of being who need to be preserved from an all-swallowing immensity. Rima.
The great harmonies overturned upward heart, burst open the narrow drums that keep us safe against the forces of the universe.
Yes. So there's a heart that's beating so powerfully that it breaks the barriers, the dams, the narrow dams that keep us safe against the forces of the universe. This is the function of the chakras. They are entrances through which we can come in contact with other worlds. But eventually, for us to become fully universalized, they have to be broken down. And there's, in the agenda, we find Mother's beautiful description of these heartbeats, these powerful heartbeats. No? Is it April 1962?
Sorry?
Is it April 1962, Mother's experience of these pulsations, tremendous, powerful pulsations of love, shaking apart the universe? Anyway.
1962, but April, 13 April.
13.
Pent up.
Pent up, yes. Something that's pent up is confined. It can't move freely. So if something is pent up, for example, if steam is pent up, if you put the lid on the pressure cooker, then the steam gets pent up inside and it becomes more and more and more powerful until it blows the lid off.
So pent up feelings.
You have pent up feelings. You don't express your feelings, you think you should not, but then suddenly they erupt like a volcano. Exactly a volcano, all the magma is pent up there and it will come out. So when that happens, when these great hammer beats of the world heart, this is the heart of the world that's becoming more and more powerful and bursts open these narrow dams, these little barriers of the chakras. They keep us safe against the forces of the universe. then when that happens, would you read?
Yeah. The soul and cosmos space has equal powers, a boundless being in measureless time, invade nature with the infinite. His soul untouched, unbold, his eternal scope.
Thank you. So it means the individual soul and the whole universe face each other, see each other as equal powers. We always think of the individual as so small compared to the universe. But Sri Aurobindo says that's part of our illusion. It's not like that. The individual soul and the universe are different, we can say, expressions of the Supreme Divine, who takes the three forms: transcendent, universal, individual. Each of them are his equal expressions. They're equal powers. So when he realizes and experiences that, he becomes a boundless being in a measureless time. And that boundless being invades the human nature with the infinite. So Asvapati can see his titan scope, his superhuman possibilities, unpathed, trackless, nobody's been there before, and unwalled. There are no limits, no barriers stretching out in front of him. It's reaching a kind of a milestone, a special point in his sadhana. So we'll stop there. It's a little late even.
As when a timeless eye annuls the hours, abolishing the agent and the act, so now his spirit shone out, wide, blank, pure. His wakened mind became an empty slate, on which the universal and soul could write. All that represses our fallen consciousness was taken from him like a forgotten load. A fire that seemed the body of a god consumed the limiting figures of the past and made large room for a new self to live. Eternity's contact broke the molds of sense. A greater force than the earthly held his limbs. Huge workings bared his undiscovered sheaths. Strange energies wrought and screened tremendous hands, unwound the triple cord of mind and freed the heavenly wideness of a Godhead's gaze. As through a dress the wearer's shape is seen, there reached through forms to the hidden absolute a cosmic feeling and transcendent sight. Increased and heightened were the instruments. Illusion lost her aggrandizing lens, as from her failing hand the measures fell. Atomic looked the things that loomed so large. The little ego's ring could join no more. In the enormous spaces of the self, the body now seemed only a wandering shell. His mind, the many-frescoed outer court of an imperishable inhabitant. His spirit breathed a superhuman air. The imprisoned deity rent its magic fence, as with a sound of thunder and of seas, vast barriers crashed around the huge escape. Immutably coeval with the world, circle and end of every hope and toil, inexorably drawn round thought and act, the fixed, immovable peripheries effaced themselves beneath the incarnate's tread. The dire velamen and the bottomless crypt between which life and thought forever move, forbidden still to cross the dim dread bounds. The guardian darknesses, mute and formidable, empowered to circumscribe the wingless spirit in the boundaries of mind and ignorance, protecting no more a dual eternity, vanished, rescinding their enormous role. Once figure of creation's vain ellipse, the expanding zero lost its giant curve. The old adamantine vetoes stood no more. Overpowered were earth and nature's obsolete rule. The python coils of the restricting law could not restrain the swift arisen God. Abolished were the scripts of destiny. There was no small death-hunted creature more, no fragile form of being to preserve from an all-swallowing immensity. The great hammer beats of a pent-up world heart burst open the narrow dams that keep us safe against the forces of the universe. The soul and cosmos faced as equal powers. A boundless being in a measureless time invaded nature with the infinite. He saw unpathed, unwalled his Titan scope.